I saw my task, honestly, as an adoptive parent, to give them a sense of family and community and roots, exactly because their own biological roots have been cut. I usually use a metaphor of grafting them onto our family tree.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Some families are built through tradition, while others are built through choice and a whole lot of persistence. Lane Igoudin is a college professor, writer, and father. He wrote a memoir called A Family Maybe: 2 Dads, 2 Babies, and the Court Cases That Brought Us Together. The book shines a light on the complex and often invisible world of foster to adoptive parenting. Lane and his husband Jonathan were among the first openly gay couples in Los Angeles County to adopt through the foster care system, a process that was as emotionally exhausting as it was transformative. In this conversation, Lane shares the raw truth about navigating an overloaded child welfare system, the emotional toll of wading through years of court decisions, and how building a family from love, not biology, created something unshakable. We also talk about the beauty of chosen family, the power of being seen, and what it means to parent and love through uncertainty. Lane's story offers heart, humor, and a deeply human reminder that love isn't always simple, but it's always worth it. Lane Igoudin, thank you for being here on A Joyful Rebellion today.
Glad to be here. Thank you, James.
Yeah, you've had a busy year because it was a little over a year ago that you launched your book. It's called A Family Maybe.
Right.
The subtitle is 2 Dads, 2 Babies, and the Court Cases That Brought Us Together. And I want to talk a lot about family today because, there's that old saying that just doesn't hold up. And the saying is you get to choose your friends, but you don't always get to choose your family. And that's not quite the case anymore.
I think it's a great line. I wouldn't say we've gotten really past that, but we've really opened up to new avenues, shall we say, to new avenues as to what defines a family and what makes a family and how to make a family. Mm. So I'm going to talk today about the choice to have a family and to make a family through adopting children from foster care. But I think it really belongs to the type of family formation choices where basically, as I write it in my book, the child is conceived in the mind. That's where our family, as far as the kids are concerned, began, is that we conceived our children in the mind. We wanted to do it and we went into it. In that sense, yeah, it's a different way of creating a family today.
You launched your book a little over a year ago. What has been the response so far? You've done a lot of touring, book tours, and you're still going strong. It looks like I'm on your website right now and seeing all the different places you've been and people you've met along the way. So it looks like a lot of people are connecting with your story.
Yes, they are. And this is my first book, my first completed book. And it's a book I never actually planned to write because I'm trained as a linguist. I have been writing quite a bit. I've published book reviews and things like that. But this is a book that sort of needed to be written. It was asking me to write it down. I'm learning a lot as a new writer. And so last year, I really focused on the book tour, and it really came together very nicely. I had 12 readings all the way from Portland, where the press is. The publisher is part of Portland State University. And so we started there and then went down here to Southern California, Los Angeles, West Hollywood, Palm Springs, and all the way down to Mexico City. So it was a very, very exciting time for me. But it was also, now that the book's been exactly out a year, it was published last February, I sat down and I thought about, okay, what do I want to do with it now? And I realized that, like you said, there was a lot of response. And I noticed that people respond to me speaking, kind of telling our story. So I decided to focus on the opportunities to talk about it more than do signing events at bookstores, but more talk about it. So that's what brought me to your podcast, The Joyful Rebellion.
Fantastic. Well, I am so glad you're here. And you wanted to read a passage from your book, kind of bring us into the story and give us a sense of what things were like when you decided to bring some kids into your family and how you decided to go about it. So if you're ready for that, we'd love to get into your story a little bit.
That's great. So I'm going to read the opening chapter of my book, which is called Curbside Delivery. And that gives you, I think, that brings you straight into the thick of things as far as our story is concerned. Okay. It was on a hot early summer afternoon, just before the breezes would begin blowing inland from the ocean, that Jonathan shot me an irritated sideways glance. Where is she? Didn't she say early in the morning? That was hours ago. What's taking her so long? A 6'3" athlete with the face of the Bridgerton lead, my partner John was lining up daisy-patterned onesies and burp cloths by the bassinet in the baby room. I heard him vacuum this room earlier, and before that tidying up the crib and the toys in the baby room upstairs. Patience, dear, I sighed. Just give her a few more minutes. She should be on her way. Like John, I was trying to control my anxiety by being useful, yet I couldn't help rushing to the window every time I heard a car drive by. Jackie Willis, our designated Los Angeles County social worker, was neither here nor responding to my calls. Did the county change its mind? Did they release the baby to her mother, Jenna? We had been living with this uncertainty for months. Jenna was due around Memorial Day, but with office closures and Jackie out on medical leave, the baby could have gone to the wrong home. But that Memorial Day, I received a phone call from Babushka, my Russian-speaking grandmother. Mazel tov, she announced. Your Jenna gave birth today. Well, how on earth do you know that? I've heard nothing from the county. I just know, she said in her raspy, confident voice. Так что не волнуйся, сам увидишь. Don't worry, you'll see for yourself. I relayed her announcement to John, and he chuckled at my dear 84-year-old grandma, our closest ally in the family. I chuckled too, but deep down I felt even more anxious. What if she was right? I had no experience raising a newborn, nor did John. Zero. We had been trained and certified, but that was all just textbook learning. Were we really about to become caretakers of a tiny, fragile life 100%, 24/7? What were we getting ourselves into? 3 days later, a social worker called from the hospital with the news that the baby had been born on Memorial Day at noon, just as Babushka had said. But she couldn't be released yet. She had sepsis, a potentially fatal blood infection, and had to be put on medication. Other arrangements had already been made by Jackie. The newborn would not be released to her mother. Instead, she would be detained, that is, put in the court's protective custody and placed with us as an emergency foster home. The baby would remain with us as her long-term foster parents, while Jenna would be given an opportunity and resources to reunite with her child. Sepsis made it easier for the county to carry out its plan. Jenna recovered quickly and was discharged home to continue, as we were told, with her drug rehab and counseling. Meanwhile, the baby was improving on antibiotics, while the court, on the DCFS request, formally detained her. But Jenna came back to breastfeed, and the nurse leaked the secret. Devastated and desperate, Jenna refused to leave, pleading with the staff to let her take her baby home. On June 6th, the phone rang. I'm on my way to the hospital, Jackie yelled over the freeway hum in the background. Jenna still there? Oh, yes, she's still there, camped out, refusing to leave. She knows I'm coming to get the baby. Poor Jenna. I couldn't imagine how she would feel or what she would do once Jackie got there. My chest tightened, and it was becoming real for us, too. After all these months, really real, our life was going to split into before and after. At 4:30, a black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of our house. Jackie? John ran out the front door. I followed him out onto the porch into the blindingly bright afternoon. Jackie didn't hand the baby over, but waited for John to take her out of the car seat inside her vehicle. Liability reasons, I assumed. In John's hands, the baby looked small, like a delicate, light brown doll, her face no bigger than John's palm. All she had on was a pink onesie with the word baby embroidered in white across the chest. And despite my hesitations, a strong affection washed over me the moment I saw her, barely awake, helpless, innocent. And John just melted. Eyes on the baby, breathlessly he carried her into the house. Jackie looked a bit shaken. Jenna had confronted her in the parking lot, yelling, accusing her of betrayal. Jackie handed me the cooler bag with several bottles of formula and a 3-inch binder with medical information and placement papers. The baby and the bag, no baby blanket, nothing else. And then she glanced at her watch and said, "I gotta go, guys. Trying to be the rush hour." I thanked her. Jackie got back into her SUV and left. It was done. I found John inside in the hallway, standing still with the baby in his arms, awestruck. Keeping his eyes on her, he passed the infant to me. Then he picked up his car keys from the dining room table and headed out. I knew he would be back in a few minutes and not alone. And I'm going to skip a couple of paragraphs to the end of this chapter, where I was still feeding the baby when the front door opened and in walked John with a toddler, holding him by the index finger. Her cheeks rosy after a day of play at her preschool, the baby's older sister, Mariana. So that's the beginning of the book. It's the first chapter. We were about 1/3 into our story. So at this point, we have a newborn in the house, but we already had her older sister with us for close to 9 months. So from this point, our story actually goes into an overdrive because of the presence of the baby and a toddler, and we're both working full-time, and we have no support. And the county is going through all kinds of crazy things, and the courts go wild. So we're moving forward, but I'm also building up how we got to the point that we are here at this moment in time with 2 very, very small kids in the house.
Wow. And then it just sounds like it develops from there. When you and John decided you were going to be foster parents, what led up to that? What kind of conversations were those?
What's interesting is that as I was growing up, I had a sort of a vision of myself and my future. I knew I was gay, but I also knew that I wanted to be a father. I helped to raise my younger sister, and we remained very close. And I kind of saw myself as a single dad with 2 kids, a single gay dad with 2 kids. In my future, that was the sort of the vision. That's what you're going to be like. But I ended up being a married gay dad with 2 kids, and my husband and I have been together almost 30 years now. That was not part of the plan, that part. But having children was always something that I was expecting to do. When we met, I told Jonathan about it. He wasn't on board at the beginning. It took him several years to get to that point. He got interested, and we started to explore opportunities. And once we went into the process, he's been a terrific dad to our kids. I want to tell you and your listeners that the kind of the socio-political landscape we're looking at is years, I would say, 2004 to 2008, when we were the first generation of out gay parents. Because prior to 2000, roughly speaking, if there was a child in a gay home, it would have been most likely a child from a previous marriage. And we have friends who have continued to co-parent their kids after they left their wives or girlfriends or whatever. But starting sometime in the 1990s, in some states, not all, the states began to open their foster care systems to gay individuals and couples, not because they're very much for LGBTQ rights, but because there's just so many kids that needed a home. And we are living in Los Angeles County, which has the largest foster system in the country back then and still does. So when we went into the process, there are more than 30,000 kids that the county was trying to handle, not very successfully, as my book shows. And so we were a little bit under the radar, a little bit on the hush-hush, but also kind of, come on, we got a lot of kids that need a home. So we had multiple venues available to us as 2 professionals. We could have gone through surrogacy, international adoption. I know you had an international adoption guest in your program before. Private adoption. We really wanted to do foster adoption because we wanted to do exactly that. We wanted to open our home to 1 or 2 kids from the community. And that was like another vision that we followed. And we weren't young. At the time we went into the process, I was in my mid-30s and John was in his 40s. So our kids now are 18 and 20. My husband is retiring this year. So we weren't young parents, but this was a very conscious decision. And just one thing I want to mention before we leave the topic of the time. So those 2000s was also the time when the gay community was fighting for equal rights. So throughout the process, Jonathan and I remained, quote unquote, single individuals in the eyes of the federal government and probably half the states in the union. And we adopted 2 kids, 2 sisters, actually they're sisters, as you can tell from the first chapter, while remaining single. So it was a very strange situation with two single men adopting two related sisters. It was a little bit absurd. And so in 2008, California passed the same-sex marriage. It became legal. We got married. But then 5 months later, it was put on hold because we had a proposition that passed which did not allow any more. So there are 18,000 couples in our state, including ours, which were in this sort of a limbo for the next 9 years. When we were married in this state, yes, we were, and we're paying taxes as a married couple. And in the eyes of the federal government, we were single. And we're paying separate taxes, and you throw in a bunch of kids and heads of household, and becomes a big mess. And there are states, if we were to cross the state line, our parental rights could have been abridged, put it this way. So it was a kind of a crazy landscape. So once same-sex marriage became legal in the whole country, which was roughly, I think it was fall, 2015, when the Supreme Court in the United States passed the decision. Basically, that resolved our civil rights issue. But of course, who knows what's going to happen next? We might be back to where we were.
Wow. So much of what I talk about on this podcast is folks who decide that they really want to start participating in their own life and to create their own story. And it sounds like you had that from a really early age. So many people that I talk to just out and about, myself included, sort of had a program, a track we were on from the time we were kids, and we grew up in a certain kind of family, and they had expectations, and then you go to this school, then you go to that school, then you go to this job. It sounded like from pretty early on, you knew what you wanted to do. You knew how you wanted your life to look. It doesn't sound like you were taking a whole lot of input from other sources who may want you to do or fit into their own box. And so that in itself is a huge inspiration.
Well, I believe in authenticity, and I'm also a person of faith, quite a religious person, became more and more so over the years. And so I believe that we do have a certain type of gift, mission, a path to follow, and it's our really job. And if you believe that it comes from God, I believe that it's our religious duty to follow that path, if you can find strength in that. So I try to listen to that inner voice and follow it where it leads me. Sometimes those wishes would coincide with the wishes of my family, but oftentimes they didn't. But it's fine. It's fine because basically you have your own life to live. I tell people to own that authentic individual complexity that you have. It's yours. This is who you are. And just recognize what's there and don't look away. Look at it and work with it. So I work with what I felt were parts of me. And I'm still discovering, because the other part of this story that I'm telling you is while we're going through the adoption process and we're raising our kids, I also went through a career change. And so both storylines in my life really overlapped exactly at the time when I'm describing, because I was working in marketing communications for 11 years. I was, at the time of the chapter that I read, I was a public affairs officer with a business school at a state university and I went back to graduate school because I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing now, which is teach English and linguistics. And so I was in grad school at the same time as I was working on one campus, and I was in grad school on another campus of the same system.
Wow. Okay.
And what happened was that June that I'm describing, June 6th is when the social worker brought the baby. June 10th is when my business college had the commencement that I've been preparing for 5 months. June 15th is when I was graduating with my degree, my master's in teaching English as a second language. And I was already teaching a couple of classes, so it was like a perfect storm in terms of everything that was going on at the time. So I did, several months later, after this time that I'm describing, I actually quit my job as a public affairs officer and started teaching first at 4 different colleges, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. And then eventually landing a full-time tenure job with a college where I've been for the last, 15 years.
Wow, you had a lot going on. Just a lot going on. And at that point, it's easy as a person to think, okay, these are some things I want to do with my life, or this is the direction I want my life to go. And so much of what I see out in the world is, set some goals, make a vision board. And then sometimes you start executing on those plans and things get hard, really hard. And part of the title of your book is The Court Cases That Brought Us Together. Yeah. So when did things start really getting hard? And how long did those court cases and those times that might have made you and John look at each other and say, oh, do we want to keep going? Is this what we want? And then you look in the mirror every day and say, is this what I want? What was that like?
The part that Sab had, which says that brought us together. Well, on one hand, it's the kids and us that were brought together. And I think it was not a random, it was not a coincidence that we were brought together. I think as much as we needed these kids, I think we were meant to parent these kids, to be honest, because I think they needed that, the home that they ended up being in, supportive as it was, it's been. We're empty nesting now, so our kids are off. One is living independently, the other one is in college, but we've given them the childhood that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So we were like part of their path in a way. But another way I would say that brought us together was Jonathan and me, because it was just the two of us. We didn't have the luxury of having extended family around us, and it was just the two of us working full time and managing two little kids. So that really brought us closer together in that we had to work together, like two hands really. So like there was no time to slack off because you know what it's like with two kids. And so I think that really, really brought us together as a couple, as a partnership. And the one thing that I learned is that when you go through something like this, when you're on a path, like let's say in our case, family building, you need to think of your loved ones, your real support network, and never take them for granted. Because at the end of the day, the core of our family is John and me. I mean, that's where it started, and that's where it should be when the whole thing is over, whichever way it turns out. But that's the course. I should never take him for granted. I should show him my appreciation and gratitude for being there and love him more for that. Because I see couples breaking up over something as emotionally challenging, taxing as a foster adoption could be. And we did not come to that point, even though we made it through a pretty rough situation for several years. Yeah.
I've never been a foster parent. I've never tried to adopt a child. I have a friend who has, and sounds like you go through the ringer in terms of just all of the things, the background checks, the hoops you have to jump through. But then you've got a situation where you may pass all of those with flying colors through the county, and now you've got state law sort of coming into effect, or maybe even federal law coming into effect. What's going on? How did you guys navigate all of that?
That was one type of stigma we dealt with, being a gay couple. That had more to do with, like you said, with state and federal laws. The other stigma, and this is where my book kind of reads like a thriller,
No.
is because we were in a roughly 3-year process with these two kids, and the process was being decided without us.
Oh.
So we took in two babies. They attached to us. We got emotionally attached to them. And those babies could be taken out of our home at any point. So my book sort of exposes the reality of children's courts. And children's courts are closed to public. It's not like you can walk in and watch the proceedings. If you're not party to the case, you will not be allowed in the courtroom. And we weren't. Because we were considered, at the time, we were foster parents, even though we were intending to adopt these kids. But once the birth mother, whom I already mentioned, returned and came, so she was in the courtroom. The birth father of one of them was in the courtroom. The county was represented by the county council, which was protecting the county, not the kids. The children were represented by their own attorney, who will never meet these kids. And the judge had her own agenda, which was highly subjective, in my opinion. So you've got all these parties making decisions for the kids, and none of them actually get to meet the kids except for the birth parents. But birth parents are not raising them. We're the ones raising them around the clock, 24/7, and we are excluded from the process. And when we tried to be part of the process, we hired a private attorney and went in asking to be given a special status it's called de facto parent status, which would allow us to be in the courtroom and be part of the decision making for the kids that we're raising. We were denied and thrown out. And so this sense of powerlessness and worry and uncertainty, because that's what was really very palpable and emotionally very taxing. Because we had friends who lost the kids that we're raising back to the system, that were taken out of their homes, sent to wherever, and sometimes with horrible outcomes for the kids. So we did not want that to happen to the kids we were raising and to us as a family. So this lack of respect, this disempowerment, this powerlessness in the process, that was a big part of that too.
Wow. That had to really be a hit to your personal momentum And just, wow, that would be tough. But you guys got through that. Were the kids at home with you as this court stuff was going on?
Yes, yeah, we were the
Yeah.
parents.
So it was just all these other folks getting together in a room, in a courtroom, talking about the fate of the kids who were living at your house.
The primary goal of what child welfare, as far as the state is concerned, is to reunify the kids with their birth families. And I fully agree with that goal. But unfortunately, there are many situations where it's not possible for various reasons. And no matter how many resources you throw at the birth family may not be able to be the parents you want them to be, and this is all fine and well, but this takes time for, how slow the court cases are. But in the life of a small child, a week is like a month is like a year. They grow up so quickly, and they develop attachments, and they grow, and they need this, hands-on care, that it's not like, okay, well, let's see what's going to happen a year from now. A year from now, this child will be someone else. So we're talking about two children. In our case, our older daughter has been with us since she was roughly 12, 13 months. And her sister, as you just heard, was a newborn. So who do you think they think of as their parents? Who do they know as this? Which adults do they know as their parents? So all these legal discussions and dealing and haggling and trying to find the best solution for what to do with these kids, it comes at the expense of the kids themselves. So the thing is, there's supposed to be what's called a parallel process, the concurrent track, and we were the concurrent track in case the reunification doesn't work out. But we were never really treated as a sort of legitimate option. We were like less than unwanted and unwanted in the courtroom type of option. And so this is exactly what I've been advocating against, that if the child is removed from a home, believe me, the state doesn't want the children. The tremendous costs, and there's so many, and the overburdened social workers and judges and attorneys, the state does not want your children. If it has to remove the children from a home, there's usually a good reason. If the child can go back, that's great, but in many situations where it doesn't, from the get-go, there should be an expectation that if a child is removed from a home, let's build up both tracks. Let's be equally respectful of the opportunity of the child to go back to the birth family, but also consider the family they're in. And that just wasn't happening.
Got it. And so you guys went through, sounds like 3 years of just back and forth and trying to advocate for them, advocate for yourselves, and get some sort of stability for the kids for a good outcome. Describe what it was like the first time you guys were maybe all around the dinner table, you and John, your two daughters, and you all kind of looked at each other and everybody sort of breathed a sigh of relief, like, okay, this is us now. This is it. We feel safe in this situation right now. What was that like?
I would say the crucial point in that process is the termination of the reunification services for the birth family. Because from that point on, it's on the natural relatives, I should say, or the natural family, to prove that their rights were terminated, but they can still come back and parent. So they have to prove a lot more. So for us, it didn't really happen up until, I would say, maybe 2 years into the process with our older daughter. But the court would still do all kinds of crazy things. The court would try to separate this. There was a lot going on. But what I would say is that people ask, well, do you celebration the adoptions? How was that for you? We're definitely very happy once our adoptions were finalized. But honestly, to us as parents, it didn't make one bit of difference what a judge decided 20, 30 miles away from our home, because we've been parents to these kids. These kids know us as their parents. I'm not going to love you more just because a person who has never met you and would never will has decided that now it's okay for us to keep you.
Yeah.
This conflict between the legal, as I think we've talked about a lot already, and the human part, which is you have a baby in the house, the baby needs you, you raise the baby attaches to you. The fact that it didn't come out of your body doesn't change the nature of your relationship with that baby. So the conflict between that and the legal shenanigans that went on 20 miles away is like another uncomfortable truth that I'm bringing out with my book.
I'm not going to speak for all parents, but I've been a parent, and I guess I am a parent because both kids are walking around right now. And so you want to shelter your kids from all the bad stuff that's going on in the world. And you were put in a position where you're the parent. I mean, you're providing for them, you are interacting with them, you're raising them. every day. And at the same time, you're put in a position where people, like you said, 30 miles down the road are getting together in a room. They're excluding you. And they're also stripping away some of your ability to shelter those two girls from whatever they decide. And so I'm curious, when you said they tried to separate the sisters, were there times when the kids got taken out of the home where they moved from place to place a little bit while they were trying to work things out? Like how much were they affected?
No, from the time they were placed in our home,
Okay.
they were never taken out. But I would say, especially with the younger one, with the baby that I described, we had 4 different points throughout our story. We came to the point where she could have been removed. And one time it came very close. The same social worker I mentioned before, she called me on the Friday and said that Monday there'll be a court and they're going to remove the child and place her with her birth father. So the choice that I made, I went to the daycare and I filled out the paperwork. I filled out the withdrawal form, which I still have. It's in my files. I filled it out. I did not tell Jonathan. This was the baby that grew up on his chest, that was with him everywhere. And to this day, the bond between them is just incredible. So I decided I'm not going to tell him until we actually know when they're coming, and we'll just deal with it at that moment. And Monday, there was a court date, and something else happened in the courtroom, something of criminal nature. I'm not going to get into this, against the father, where they decided, oh, okay, well, we're not going to do this for now, but we're going to start some completely different type of proceedings against the father at this point. So, yeah, we're not removing the baby. And at this point, the baby was over 1 year old. What it will do to her, first and foremost, the disruption, the rupture of the attachment to the people that she knows as her parents, which is us. So it did not happen. What happens, though, when you go back to that idea of the support network and whatever undertaking that you do, is that we began to build bridges. Like I said, with just the two of us. So we had a supportive network of families in our neighborhood. I would say primarily moms. So yes, that we're friends with to this day. So strong moms. And I'm glad that our girls actually grew up with exposure to them, not because I felt they were lacking for the caretaking. No, I think in that case, any responsible adult could be a good caretaker. But I wanted to see what it's like to be a kind of a strong, self-sufficient, independent woman in this society. That I wanted to see and learn from. So I'm glad that we're exposed to it. So the moms, when it came to that sort of sense, but also in the courtroom, we also began to build bridges to the children's attorney. You know, it's like trying to find allies that we could reach out and work with. So yeah, that's crucial. That's really crucial.
Where my mind goes now is there is that point in, I guess it's usually adolescence, where you start thinking about things, and maybe you start thinking about, where did I come from? Like, who are my people? I remember vividly myself, I grew up with a stepfather, and I was really close to my grandparents on my biological father's side. So I didn't have a whole lot of questions there, but I did have some other relatives, like extended uncles and things, that I didn't know a whole lot about. They had died, and I remember just going on a search on my bike. I was maybe 14 at this point. I guess I could have just asked, hey, where's this person buried, or whatever it was, but for some reason in my mind, I was like, no, I'm going to go on a quest. I'm going to find this. I'm going to find out like when they were born and when they, like, what was going on my own. And I never did. but I was asking those questions. I was around 14. With your girls, was there a point at which they started getting curious about who their biological people were and start asking questions?
Ours is a closed adoption.
Okay.
So there has been no contact with the birth family since the termination of parental rights.
Okay.
It wasn't my decision. I think, honestly, in retrospect, if we take it to the beginning of the story, if the birth mother had voluntarily sort of given up her rights in exchange for some sort of an open adoption agreement, we would have been open to that. The way the story played out, by the end of it, she did consent, but there was no follow-up. There was no continuation of that. I wouldn't even call it a relationship, but connection, I think, would be the better way to put it.
Okay.
Because the younger one never got to know her as a mother. She just knew her as somebody who she sees once a week for an hour. And she saw her daycare staff more, a lot more than she saw her. But the state law provides a way for them to find their parents, their biological parents, if they wish to do so. And they're very much aware of that. They're adults now. It's available to them. As our kids were growing up, we were opening the story more and more to them. When they got to read the book, they already knew a lot of it, because there are things you can tell a 15-year-old that you cannot tell a 5-year-old about, where they came from and why they're here and not with their birth family. It starts with, your mommy really loved you, but she couldn't be with you, so she wanted us to take care of you. So that's like, you begin with that, and then just you keep adding and adding more and more information as they get older and more of receiving it. I saw my task, honestly, in a way, as an adoptive parent, to give them a sense of family and community and roots, exactly because their own biological roots have been cut. So I usually use the metaphor of grafting them onto our family tree. So my husband's family lives in Central Valley, and they do come up here quite a bit to Los Angeles, and they've been part of our kids growing up. My sister, while she was alive, was also often in our home. And I'm very close to my father, and so like we see him quite a bit, and to this day, even though he doesn't live where we live. So there is that sense, but there's also a sense of community. I'm part of the Jewish community, and we raise our kids Jewish. So growing up with other kids in our temple, a lot of intermarried families, there's some adopted kids. So it was no big deal, put it this way, that there are other kids who are converted, whose parents converted. So they weren't in any ways unique in that sense. So they know that these communities have been with them and they will support them. Our kids are also Hispanic, partially, and so we wanted to expose them to the Chicano culture, to the Hispanic culture here in Los Angeles, Spanish language, Museum of Latin American Arts, where they went for their summer camps and things like that. At the end of the day, I feel like I'm much more excited about it than they are. But at least they know, and they can continue to explore and get deeper into that part of their biological roots if they're interested. So I feel that we've given them enough stability that they can take it whichever way they want to, in that sense.
What was their reaction to the book when they read it?
Very different, very different. You have to realize that our older daughter was already in a foster home before us. We were her second placement. And so she had a pretty traumatic first year of her life. So she has a lot of, I would say, I think like deeper, like her responses are much deeper to everything that's going on, because I think a lot of it is already inside of her that I was bringing up to the surface. So she read it overnight. She called us in the morning, and she was very thankful, and she was crying, and she was very thankful about everything but she already knew a lot of the story. And I told my partner, I said, give her a few days and then we'll get the full extent of it. So in about 4 or 5 days, there was a 2-hour conversation with her, and we had to really work through like a lot of deeper issues that are brought up to the surface. Again, not really us, but things which happened before us, I would say. With our younger daughter, I don't think she ever finished the book. I think she kind of gone through half the book at this point. And she's gone to even one of my book signings, and she knows very well about the story. But I don't think it really is all that interesting to her, because she knows who her family is, and that's us and her sister.
Yeah.
So I don't think she kind of wants to rock the boat in that sense, as far as her own understanding that is. That's just my interpretation. But the fact is, she has never finished the book. She has never asked me any questions about her birth family. It's always been me trying to tell her about it, like as much as I know from before the adoption. So if that's her reaction, I just have to accept it. When I speak about my story, I usually get the general audience like yourself who are fascinated with the story and maybe a little bit about the oddness of it too. And sometimes I get someone who has been adopted in the audience, who has been an adoptive parent, whose siblings are adopted, who has put up their kids for adoption. I get a very different reaction to my book. I get a very visceral, very raw reaction, and it's usually, thank you for telling the story as it is, because it's not what we want it to be, but it is what it is. And I do not try to sort of beautify or put some sort of a better spin on it. It is what it is. And I can usually spot that reader in the crowd just by the way they're looking at me and the questions that they ask afterwards. Very often after I do the reading, somebody comes up to me and starts telling their story of adopting and being adopted, giving up a child for an adoption, and I just stand there and I listen and I honor that. But it brings it up at a much deeper level.
Very much. Well, Lane, thank you for all of this. If someone wants to connect with you, see what you're up to, get a copy of the book, what's the best way to connect with you?
Well, the book is published by a traditional press, which is Ooligan Press of Portland State University. So it's available through regular distributors. It's available on Amazon, Bookshop, in stores too, some stores, but you can definitely find it online. If you'd like me to sign it for you, you can also go on my website and get it there, and I'll be happy to send it to you. My website is pretty active. It's laneigoudin.com, LANEIGOUDIN. I invite you to take a look. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Lane Igoudin, LANEIGOUDIN. Send me an email, message me, whatever. I love hearing from people.
I so appreciate you being here for this conversation. There are at least a half dozen people that I can think of in my head right now who are listening and got so much from this perspective, and also a little bit of validation from their own story. I really appreciate you writing this book, being vulnerable, putting this out, because I know a lot of folks who have either been through this are comforted by it, and people who maybe getting ready to go into this, because like you described it, you may not know what to expect. And if it's really important, then you're going to stick to it like you and John have. And I appreciate your story.
Thank you for having me on your show, James.
Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.